Oh man, do I have the ad reads of ad reads for you. Before we get into this next episode, check out 18 Alpha Fitness. That's 18afitness.com. Promo code the number 1 and ready. Kevin is a master of getting you ready for the pipeline or any kind of selection of your choosing. Ranger School, Q Course, Buzz, Aspect War, ANS, whatever, he's got you covered. Just let him know what your current fitness levels are, where you need to be, depending on which selection you're going to, and then what your timetable is. And then he can tailor make a program just for you. Even if you're not trying to go into selection and you just want to get better at Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu or your kettlebell work or rucking or whatever, he's got you covered. He'll take care of you. So go see my man, Kevin Edgerton, over at 18afitness.com and use our promo code 1READY and you'll get yourself a discount. Also, check out Hoist. Our friends over at Hoist are producing some phenomenal stuff. They've got great flavors. They've got your ready-to-drink IV level hydration. They've got little packets like this. Already busted it open. So you know I'm enjoying it. The only thing I got to do is make sure I don't have a freaking red mustache across my mouth. But drinkhoist.com, promo code one's ready, will get you a discount. It's great hydration. I take it everywhere with me. As you can see, I'm not in the studio. I'm on the road. But you know what? I got a backpack full of these little guys. So check them out and enjoy your discount. And now, enjoy this episode with Stephen Nisbet. He is one of the founders of Shields and Stripes. In this episode, it's cool because I wasn't there, but after watching it and listening to it, you know, Aaron and Stephen went down some really cool paths that I think everybody would really enjoy. So I hope you do, and thanks for tuning in.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the team room. It's just me, your boy, Aaron, sitting down with one of my good friends, Steve Nisbet. Steve, thanks for coming on the podcast, man. What's up?
Thanks for having me, bud. Always a pleasure to catch up with you. It's been too long, many moons. So this will be a good conversation. We haven't actually seen each other or spoken in several years. So
yeah, quite a while. And I love that hat. I love the Shields and Stripes hat. And we're obviously going to talk about that project. I'm glad you got that hat, not the blue one that you lost back in 2010. So we'll probably talk about that story as well, man. Steve, just for the people out there that are talking, man, just tell us a little bit about yourself, you know, your career and how you got to where you are now.
Yeah. So I grew up in Tucson, Arizona. Was born in Colorado. Spent most of my time in Tucson. Just a basic normal childhood. Spent most of my time playing sports, mostly soccer, but an athlete all the way around. I had a big plan to go to college like the rest of my buddies, my friends in high schools and all my pals. They were all a lot smarter than I was, at least engineering-wise, so they started getting engineering. They started focusing on the engineering degree itself and getting scholarships to these prestigious universities. And meanwhile, here I am, poor Steve, like, well, I guess I'll just go to a community college. And so I went to a community college, and I was a space nerd. I enjoyed space and astronomy and all that stuff. And I was like, man, it'd be really cool to discover life outside of another planet and stuff. And then I really started to do astronomy, and I was like, this is boring. You know, like just look at like doing calculations and whatnot. I'm an 18-year-old, 19-year-old kid. Like, man, there's a lot that I could still do with my life. Until I eventually was like, man, I guess I really don't have a big pathway ahead of me. And I might as well just look at what the military option has.
Sure.
And my dad had spent several years in the Air Force. My grandfather spent an entire career in the Air Force. So that was kind of really in my blood. Was that pathway. And I went to an Air Force recruiter, sat down with him, and took the ASVAB, and I ended up scoring actually pretty well on the ASVAB. And they were like, hey, you can do pretty much anything you want. And I was like, what's the most challenging career field? Like, what's the thing that like I can really hang my hat up on? And
sure.
What he pulled up was a nuclear weapons apprentice. And because that required a lot of intelligence. And I was like, okay, that sounds good. And I was like, you know what? Maybe here's my pathway. Maybe I'll go be a nuclear weapons apprentice. I'll do that for 4 years, and then I'll just get out with a GI Bill I'll go to school, and then I'll meet my pals at the University of Arizona. I'll be a little bit behind them, but
Sure.
then we'll live at Raytheon, and it'll all like everything will be good. It'll be like old times. And walked out of that office with a plan. In Central Tucson, just like stepped out, and right next door is an Army recruiter, and I have my pathway ahead of me, and ready to go get my car and just drive. Tell my parents I'm signing up for the military, and
driving off into your new life as a nuclear weapons.
I'm set. I'm feeling pretty good.
Got it. Yeah, you had life figured out as a young man. Look at you.
And then this Army fella next to me, he was standing outside, saw me walk in there, and then obviously was waiting for me to step out. I stepped out, and he said, "Hey, you want to be in Special Forces?" And I was like, "Well, that sounds pretty cool." Like, I've never considered that as an option for me. And I was like 125 pounds, soft, just a skinny fat soccer player, So I was like, "Oh, tell me more." No intent of actually joining the Army, but I wanted to hear what he had to say. So I sit there and listen to him, and I was like, "Man, that sounds pretty cool." Nobody's ever asked me that.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, "Hang on a second, I might come back." And I go back into the Air Force recruiter's office, and I was like, "Hey, do you guys have any special operations career fields?" And he goes, "Man, you already selected nuclear weapons apprentice. Just stick with that." And I was like, "Okay, my question still stands. Do you have any special operations career fields?" And this is in 2005 or 2004. And he goes, "Yeah, we got like PJs and controllers." And I was like, "Well, what is that?" And this dude still had no clue what it was. He was an Air Force recruiter back in the day. That there was still like a curtain up there, and of what they actually do. And he's like, "Well, I have a disc here. You can look at what you want to do here. Here's some information." So I was like, "Let's put a pause on the contract on everything I just signed until I decide what I want to do here." And he's like, "Look, man, why don't you just stick with what you got? You're not going to make it anyway. It's a 90% attrition rate. You're not going to make it.
Mm-hmm.
Most people don't make it. Just stick with what you got, and you'll be at boot camp in no time." And I was like, "Yeah, I'll make that decision. Just hold off on this contract." And so I started doing the research, and then I was like, "I don't really want to do anything medicine wise.
Mm-hmm.
That sounds like it's for the birds." And
Sure.
And so I was like, "I don't know what this combat control is, but like if you're controlling combat, that sounds pretty freaking cool." Like,
Right. I get to call myself a team. I get to be my own team. Like CCT, I get to be my own team. That's tight.
Exactly. Yeah. I was like, I don't know how you control it, but I know what you do.
You have my attention. Like, how do you control combat?
Sounds like you're in a special operations career field. You get to shoot guns and talk to airplanes, or at least play with radios is what it looked like on this video I was watching. And I came back and I was like, "All right, I'm gonna go into special operations. I'm gonna be a combat controller." And they're like, "Okay." So signed the paperwork that you got to pass the pass test first. I said, "What's that?" And they gave me the pass test criteria, what it was. I was like, "Okay, I'm gonna start training." "All right, your test is in like 3 months or something like that. That's when we'll give you the test." So I start training for it and whatnot. And then I get to the pass test, and they're like, "All right, which one are you going to take first? Or which one are you going to do?" And I was like, "What do you mean?" I thought it's the same thing. And I don't know, in this particular instance, he said, "Well, one of them has the swim at the beginning, one has it at the end." And I was like, "I don't understand what the difference is, but I've been training with the swim at the beginning, so I'm just going to do it the way I trained." And he's like, "All right, you're going to be a TJ." And I was like, "Hold on a second. I thought I was going to become a controller." And he's like, "When you get to basic training, it's all the same thing. You guys go through the same course."
Tale old as time. The young man Steve was bamboozled, hoodwinked, you could say.
He got me. Like, I gotcha. Yeah. And I was like, "This guy wouldn't lie to me, so that makes sense. I'll just, I'll do that. That sounds good." So I do the pass test and finish up, and then I go to basic training, and again, the theme still stands of there's like 35 other dudes in this class that are in my basic training class, and they're all working out at night. They're all doing like push-ups and pull-ups and things like that, and I'm freaking tired. Like at 9 p.m., waking up 3 in the morning and walking around all day.
Yeah,
I'm going to go to sleep. So I go to sleep. And
Right.
I don't do extra workouts and stuff at night. I just wanted to sleep and recover. And the basic training instructor pulls me aside and he's like, "Hey, you're going to be the first one to quit." I was like, "Yes, sir." Like, "Sir, yes, sir." Like, "I guess so." Everybody else is doing these things. Everybody else is doing this extra work. They're putting in extra time and whatnot. And you're just wasting away. Like, you're going to be the first one to quit. You don't know what it takes. I was like, "Yeah, I don't think this guy just knows who I am."
Well, my favorite part about that is that's some maintainer. Like, that guy was not a PJ. Like, that guy was not a combat controller. Like, that guy was literally, he was doing his special duty. Like, he was probably forced cross-trained to be a military training instructor in a time of war. And he has the audacity to pull you aside and tell you that you're going to fail. Like, the sheer audacity. I wonder where he got his pants tailored to house his massive balls for having the audacity to say that.
Yeah, and I was just like, all right, well, it's not like I'm going to argue with this guy, but I was like, okay,
right.
I mean, I don't think we can predict that at this moment because none of us have even started INDOC.
Right.
And,
yeah.
And so we get to INDOC. So 2005 started INDOC, and I think it was like a class of like 120 or so, roughly around that. And then by the end of it, from INDOC to all the way to the finish, and really only 12 of us finished and got our beret.
Mm-hmm.
Just in itself, of those 35 other people that were in that class, I was the only one to make it. To finish. And I wish I could see that dude today.
Did you ever? I was gonna ask. Did you ever cycle back? Like, did you ever circle back with that guy, or just shoot him an email, or whatever?
Because when you finish INDOC, and it's like, okay, it's like this. It's like summiting a hill when you're still going up to a peak.
Sure.
Like you get to the top of this hill, and you're like, man, I made it. And then you look up, and you're like, yeah, I got that much further to go.
I will tell you this. I will tell you one petty story that I'm sure you'll like. So I was getting ready to cross train, same time frame, by the way. So I got there like early 2006. I think it was my INDOC. And right before I was supposed to leave, like the week before, I was, no kidding, on a TDY. And I was like, okay, this is my last, hams TDY, being a phys tech. I'm going to try this PJ thing again. And the master sergeant that was in charge of the trip was like, "Hey, Aaron, we got a trip coming up in October. We're doing some really cool high altitude drops." And I was like, well, I just told you I got to go to INDOC in like 2 weeks, like May. Like, I'll be in the pipeline at that point. And he was like, "Oh, no, everybody knows you're going to fail out. So like, I'm just going to put you on this trip now because it's hard to get like everybody, like, you're still going to be a phys tech." When I graduated, I had an official photo that I had to take from Mildenhall, and that guy was still in. And I sent him a glossy 8x5 photo of myself and my beret, and I signed it. And I was like, "Go fuck yourself." Like, you were the reason why. Like, in my head, I could just hear him, and I was motivated by hate. But anyway, that is how petty.
And maybe inside that dude was probably like, "Good, man. Like, I'm glad I was able to give you that motivation."
Probably was.
You just have to
Probably.
Yeah.
So you graduated INDOC. So, and people skew that up. How was your pipeline?
The pipeline was excellent. I mean, I think so. My INDOC class was the one, back in the day in 2005. I hate saying back in the day, but back in 2005. But on the, if you look at the wall of plaques, where we had our Crow candidate pass away in the class. Mm-hmm. So that was my first, I guess, loss of a teammate.
Yep.
So him and I were partners during ETD, during Hell Night. And, the first thing I always remember this is the first thing I said to him was, once we paired up and, the game that was always, it pays to be a winner. And I looked at him and I was like, "Major Adrian, we're not going to win anything." Just so you're clear and you get that.
Just so you manage those expectations, sir.
You're winning nothing. And we got a kid. And I was like, "Look, I weigh about 120, 130 pounds, and you weigh about 220. If anything involves carrying, which is all of carrying, we're not winning a single thing." And so it was constant, like me carrying him for rounds and rounds, and then just the two of us in the pool getting smashed. And so just watching. Anyways, I say that just so it can tie on to the future, to later in this podcast. But that was the first time we lost a teammate. So it didn't really hit me. I was like, okay, well, I was prepared for this, and I was ready to lose teammates. I knew this. I had this expectation that this was going to happen, and so I didn't react, I think, the way that others did, where they took it pretty hard.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I guess it's something that weighs on me a little bit more than before. So as I continued throughout the pipeline, me and three other fellows, we called us the newbie team, the noob team, because we were getting everything done the first time every time. Dive school first time, free fall, all that paramedic, everything. So we went through the whole pipeline, and Brian Silva was one of those dudes in the noob team. But it was an enjoyable experience, and then getting through the pipeline, getting my beret, and then moving out to the first duty station, which was supposed to be at Moody, and then it got switched to be overseas into Okinawa at the STS unit out there. So did a few years there, did 3 years attached to the team, and I knew that I still had no clue what we were doing. I got to the teams, and I was like, okay, well, what do we do? Like, when we deploy, like, do we deploy? No, like, I see a couple of guys deploying. I don't even know what they do. Like, what do they?
What do they even do back there? Like, you're waiting. Yeah. You're waiting for somebody to tell you all of the secrets. Like, you show up to the unit, and that's the big thing is people ask us all the time. They're like, well, what do you do when you get there? You're like, you kind of figure it out. You're like, so I'm here now. Like, do we just go fight and do like the Air Force One thing where we like zip line from a C-130 to the president's plane, or what do we do? I can't believe you're also about to just gloss over when you met your best friend of ever, which is I believe it was your first deployment, was it not?
Who is that?
Me? You POS?
Right, that was me. That's right. That was the train up.
Yeah.
Exciting.
Yeah, the train up there.
Yeah, so exactly. We spent most of our time packing rams, doing rams jumps and packing up rams packages and just rolling these things up to like 7 p.m. And it was just like, man, this sucks. Like, I'm not really getting better at what I'm supposed to do. Like, I'm learning a lot. And I took a lot of initiative to start figuring things out, because I knew the two dudes, there was a small team, the ELs and TLs above me were about to leave. And it's like, man, I'm not going to get any training done if I don't step some stuff up, and started learning a lot of those things for myself. But it had been 2 years at that unit till I had deployed them, and all my buddies had already deployed. And I was like, man, I feel like my career is going nowhere. I'm getting no experience, and it was very discouraging to be in a career field where I was doing nothing. Mm-hmm. And then we deployed, or I went out to augment the 24th, and that's where you and I met down in North Carolina during our train up. So,
beautiful North Carolina. We figured out we have a love of soccer. The World Cup was going on. Really what we had a love for was irresponsibly drinking on an early Saturday afternoon, I believe. I think that's more what it was. It's just the soccer game happened to be on and the B-dubs happened to be open. So that's
Atlanta Ale House.
Yeah. Get it. Classic. Walking stereotypes, you and I. Imagine being an operator in North Carolina and going to B-dubs in the ale house. Imagine. Well, so you get that first deployment there, and I distinctly remember that spin up as really like one of the most eye-opening times in my life, and most notably, we had Doug Dickon on and to talk about loss and losing teammates, and I distinctly remember during that spin up for us, some other stuff would happen with some people that we were in that spin up later down the road, but no kidding, just a couple days before we were scheduled to leave on that deployment, we lost Pedro 6'6", and one of the guys that I went through the pipeline with, Ben White, I was really close with. Like, that guy spent a ton of time. He was on my indoc team, and he came over all the time, and I distinctly remember the pain of that loss, and then like the sobering sort of feeling of leaving and being like, hey, well, this is a real thing. Like, we're gonna go do this thing right now, and it was a weird thing to go out the door. So yeah.
And on that, like, Danny Sanchez was actually on that train up with us, and ended up cutting his hand because he was cutting cables, doing controller stuff, and then healed up, and then ended up just hopping on a cycle later on with replacing one of his guys to one of their augmentation.
Yeah, the commando deployment. Yeah.
And ended up getting killed on that deployment. And
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember the Rangers that were out there. And this is the first time I think they brought the Ranger team leaders out to do a train up with us to understand what our tasks are, site security teams and stuff. And one of those guys, Lugo.
Three of them, Lugo and two of his friends. So I don't know why, you do this kind of when you deal with loss, but you want to go back, you want to look at all the facts. Like we lost, in the community, or somebody that we had, you and I specifically had touch points with, we lost 6 people that were involved in that spin up, or that were, PJs. Obviously we lost the crew of 6-6, and I was really close to those guys because they did most of my spin up at Nellis. So even the pilots and the back enders, I knew them really well, David Smith and Wisniewski and Simone. And, that was a really, really weird thing to kind of look back at and just be like, holy crap, that spin up was, and just the luck of it all, Danny cuts his hand, just doing some routine, training, whether it was, I think it was CQC. I think I was talking to Ribo. I think he was just like opening a door or something to cut his hand. Or I also heard he was cutting cables or something, but just the bad luck that put him in this scenario that he unfortunately was killed in action. Like that was a weird thing, man. Like it was a weird thing to deal with and then process later.
Yeah. I was actually, so we had flew out to Bob Shank, where those Rangers were. And
Fuck Shank. What a terrible piece of crap that was.
Kind of just sitting alert, and then those guys went out, and then, Lugo got shot that evening. But I had been looking for him earlier that day, and we ended up catching up and playing some Call of Duty and whatnot. Something that kind of sticks to me is, I was tuning him up on video games, just saying like, hey, like hopefully you don't play like, use tactics like this in real life. You're going to end up getting killed, and then getting killed at night. So I don't know why that, but just trash talking. But I didn't get to laugh about it later on. But yeah, that was a pretty heavy deployment where a lot of stuff happened, and right off the bat on that deployment, we had a pretty good base attack, which was like the first time that I had gotten shot at.
Yeah.
A silly experience, because our buddy Eric, who was out there with me, we were sitting on the roof getting a tan, right? And
right.
I'll tell this story because a lot of people are like, "Oh, what was it like first getting shot at?" Well, you have no clue.
Right. Yeah. Let me tell you how fast it happens and how long you look back at that moment. And you're like, oh no, I was completely unaware.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so, we're sitting on the rooftop, and I was like, oh, they're a few hundred meters away. The base gets attacked. We get, complex attack, V-bed, and me and one of the guys were on the roof catching a tans on board shorts and flip-flops, t-shirt off. And I just see the Apaches and the Kiowas take off, and some of the Navy guys, recce dudes, get up on this tower and start taking shots out, or at least calling out targets to the pilots that were flying overhead because they had their radios on. I was like, I'm enjoying a nice little show up here. This is pretty cool. I'm feeling pretty safe, and so while I'm up there, it sounded like somebody was shooting like right below us or right around us. And I was like, Aaron, you hear that, man? Like, is somebody shooting like right here? Because it sounds like somebody's shooting like right next to us. And I look around, and then I used to have a video of this because one of the guys was recording behind me. But then you can, as I look down, I see a round hit the wall in front of us, and then you hear zzz, and all the bullets go by. I was like, Eric, I think they're shooting at us.
What an absolutely ridiculous, surreal thing. The only thing that's even like, I hear these words and like, of course, like you internalize it, and then you're like, oh, I think I've been in a situation like that. Or like, I have empathy for this. Imagine explaining this to just some vanilla random person. Be like, Eric, I think they're shooting at us.
Yeah. I was like, Eric, I think they're shooting at us. He was like, yeah, man, I think so too. And then we lay down.
I think we should get away.
And then the Rangers were also next to us on top of the roof. And so I was like, hey, they're shooting at us. We need to get down and get off of this. And then it sounds like they're shifting over to our side of the compound, which is a bad idea on their end. So we ended up working our way to get off of that building. One of the Rangers jumped off the building and broke his ankles and got sent home. But then we just we're like, okay, well, maybe we should get our kid on and go go man the walls and see what happens over here. So we got our kit on and went to the walls, and then eventually the fight finished out. So, but that was the first time, and it was like, okay, well, now I know what that sounds like, and now I know like the amount of danger I was in, and and there's some reports that it was a mix between some of the fighters on the ground, and then you had the main gate folks, security forces folks. Well, we were a separate compound, and all of us were on a roof over there, not with uniforms or reporters and flip flops. So there's also reports that some of those security forces folks turned around and started shooting towards us. I can't confirm anything already, I won't, but those were just some of the reports,
right,
of some of the engagements that took place. But that's what it sounded like with that, with getting shot at the first time. And that was day 3 in country. And then, so just after that, it was just a lot of really good experiences, with working with the task force. And I was like, you know what? My plan was to get out, after this. And then I was like, you know what? I like this.
This is pretty cool.
I'm gonna do another one of these. And so then I re-enlisted. And I re-enlisted with the intent to go to the 24th.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a package in at the time, and but during that train up, I'm sure you remember, it wasn't like a good feeling of like a gentleman's course of like it felt like almost like a selection.
It did.
I'm not here for a selection. Like, I'm here for to help you guys out. This is your deployment. This is your tasking, and you're asking us to come here. And it literally was actually a selection because more people came out for the deployment than they needed. So they wanted to select the top dudes to go out there. So I didn't like some of the folks that were there doing that and running that, and some of their personalities and attitudes. And it was like, I'm going to withdraw my package. I'm not going out there. And so I did ultimately withdraw the package in 2010, and then ended up PCSing over to Nellis Air Force Base. But right before I had PCS was when the mainland Japan, that earthquake and the tsunami happened in 2011. So I PCSed in 2011, but in May of 2011, but went in March to go do that rescue effort out there, which was a pretty wild, like, apocalyptic experience to be out in that environment.
Yeah, and talk us through a little bit about that, because people, you talked about the combat, and you talked about being there in firefights and being that kind of on scene, chaos management sort of dude. But you were also called kind of right away, just before you were about to leave the STS and come back over to the 58th, where our paths would cross again. But you're out on the ground, not only search and recovery, but trying to open the airfield and dealing with the fallout from Fukushima, a nuclear power plant, and all that other stuff. Like, how did you make the transition from, that keyed up sort of combat? I'm here and I like this thing. I like this active combat. Was it a weird step for you to go into sort of civilian humanitarian mode?
It is a little bit of a difference, because you try to use the same terminology and the same gear and equipment. Like, I need to carry a radio on my plate carrier,
right?
I have for a radio, so I'm out there in the body armor with, even though I'm out in mainland Japan with a body armor on and radio. That's really just a way for me to carry my radio so that I can protect.
Didn't think to take those plates out, huh, bud? Didn't think to just drop the plates and just use the OBE.
I needed all the insulation I could get because it was freezing cold. We were in South Korea, and so the thing is, we were in South Korea doing an exercise, and that thing had happened. That earthquake happened, and then within a day or two, we had gotten retasked from that exercise, which that exercise sucks. So it was like, I'm glad to be out of this, but the unfortunate experiences were taking place for those folks.
Sure.
And we get an opportunity to now do the job. One thing I always tell, especially new PJs, is I never wish ill will upon anybody, but if something bad were to happen, I would hope that it was me that gets to go do the mission.
Yeah.
That's the mindset that I would get into. So, again, this was like another step, like, okay, cool. I get to go do the job again. And so we flew out there, And as we're coming in, everyone's looking out there, and I felt like the little kid, like behind everybody, like, hey, can I get a peek of what's going on through these little C-130 windows? And finally got a look, and you could see all the trees were leveled. You see boats on top of buildings, and just like cars everywhere, and it was wild. So we landed at one of the airports there that was still open, hopped in some vehicles, and drove out straight to Sendai International Airport. And the task was to get that thing up and running. Well, us as PJs was like, well, we can help clear the runway and move some things around, but we really wanted to go rescue some folks. So we spent a lot of time looking at different areas that were probably more remote that we could fly helicopters into to get either whether supplies, treat some folks, get them out of there. So we spent a lot of time just looking at these different opportunities that we would be able to affect that space. And a disaster that large and that vast, we carry a jaws of life, and I can affect one like car,
right?
That you're looking at,
right?
The entire towns and cities of just lumber everywhere. And I was like, you need a task force of like 1,000 people, and you need FEMA out here with bulldozers and all their machinery to move things around. And it's a very long project, and it was very overwhelming to be out there. So we cleared that Sendai airport and just really kind of started driving around and exploring, looking around at any opportunities to help out, which a lot of the missions ended up transporting equipment and supplies from one place to another where a remote village was cut off, maybe doing patient transfers from here to there or picking some people up. But then the Fukushima reactor was melting down, right?
So it was in danger, right? Yeah.
We were told we had to wear a dosimeter and like no other amplifying information. And
hey guys, no big deal, but we just want you to wear this thing, and then if it goes red, like just come talk to somebody.
It's just it's almost exactly that. If it reaches this number, then you need to come talk to us. I was like, okay, cool. And in my brain, in our brain, as we start, and most operator types, it's like, I just want to keep doing my job.
You're totally willing to just take it on. You're like, oh, wear this thing, and then I get to go work. Oh yeah, give me the thing. Here, what number? 99. And then in your head, you're like, they're saying 99, but I bet I can fucking high score this thing. I bet I can go to probably 110, 115. I'm in great shape. Okay, got it. Yeah, give me the thing.
Exactly. It was like, I'm not going to tell anybody about the numbers that pop up here. Like, and
you're going to take me out of the game if I tell you.
Exactly. So I'm not, and I think that's a fault of our community and how we grow up, and it's who we are as operators ourselves. Is because I started paying for it later on in life. But I was like, I'm trying to get after it. And I don't need this thing hindering my pathway to saving lives. And
imagine when we transfer that feeling, when we transfer when you start to learn that, right? That's a habit pattern, and then we apply that to habit patterns that we shouldn't, like mental health. We apply that to habit patterns that we shouldn't, like work-life balance, like effects on our relationship. You're just like, well, injuries, the list goes on and on. I don't want to tell people about these things because if I'm honest with you, you're going to tell me I can't be a PJ anymore, and I can't do that. So you know what I'm going to do? I'm not going to tell you what that number is. I'm going to put that thing in my pack. I'm not going to wear it where I'm supposed to, so that the number gets very high. Number stays low, and I stay in the game.
Exactly that. So I was always keeping an eye on it just to get some true data and information on it. But we'd have to fly out like 25 miles out away from the reactor to just get around it as we're looking at different towns and as we're flying up this. As we flew out into the ocean, there was like a line of debris where the wave had come in and then it receded and pulled everything back out. And it was like 100 miles of just debris. And I'm talking like houses were floating out there and semi-trucks and all kinds of things. So I asked the pilot, hey, can we fly low and see if there's anybody floating out here? And it's been a week or two, just to see if there's anything going on. Unlikely that somebody survived. But it was snowing. There were about 750 aftershock earthquakes and whatnot, but ultimately ended up nothing really to be discovered out there, and then flew back. But every time we get off the aircraft, they'd have some sort of radiation team to come scan us and whatnot. Again, another one of these things where I'm like, I don't want to go through this process and then them discover something and then I can't do my job and I get sent home and feel like a loser. Mm-hmm. So we had actually flown and we were on a C-130 and I was on one of the little mini bikes and me and another gentleman, who I won't name, we landed and the tail, the ramp drops and we kick it up and ramp off, like wheelie off and just go cruising down. And these guys,
superhero shit
in these suits, come like trying to run after us, just like gone.
Those little 50s, I'll tell you what, they're not very strong, right? Like you're not going to ride it for a long time, but they will outrun a nerd in a suit. Like 100%, I guarantee that those nerds in those Tyvek suits with all their little beeps and squeaks, they could not keep up with some 200-pound American battle chassis riding on a 50cc dirt bike.
Yeah, so it was a really good experience just to see how one of those things run like a big humanitarian disaster. How one of those runs, and really how limited we are in our capability as a technician. Now I get to see like we are actually like technicians in rescue. I cannot solve this massive problem, but I can solve these little problems like individually. So it helped me identify where I fit even more into the puzzle. And then just gave me a little bit of experience with, structure collapses and confined spaces and a little bit of what I do now, but the amount of aftershocks that take place. So we get back home and I'm getting ready to try to PCS, and they're doing these thyroid checks to see for radiation. And they put this little like metal device right here in my neck and another one on my chest, and they're like, "Yeah, you failed." And I was like, well,
tight.
Yeah, like what does that mean? Just go home, wash your clothes, and come back. Go home, wash my clothes, put a different one, come back. Oh, you failed again. And I was like, well, what do I do now? Like, go do the same thing. Take a really long shower, wash your clothes, get rid of all the clothes that you had out there, throw that away, put on some new clothes, and come back. And I did it again, and they're like, okay, you passed, you're good to go. And me at that time was like, oh, thank goodness.
Tight. Oh, good. Yeah, no, it was definitely the shower. It wasn't it wasn't the inherent radiation that I'd taken on while I was around a nuclear reaction and a fucking tsunami. Okay.
Yeah. And so I was like, okay, good, we can PCS. And now I can take my family out to Las Vegas, where I plan to go next. And all was good. And back in that, in that time period and being that young, I didn't think about documenting all of that stuff. I didn't think about like, hey, can you make sure that's in my records for when I retire in the future, that I can get that seen, if I start developing cancers of some sort of a third eye. So there's like a little blurb in there of my medical records saying that I was exposed to radiation, but nothing to the amount that I probably actually took in and for the length of period that I took in. So that was a frustrating experience once I started going through my retirement process.
Yeah.
So then,
we had the 107 folks on, so they're awesome people. We had multiple times the 107 folks on, 107 Foundation. The number one cohort for people that have unexplained cancers that are 100% duty connected, Air Force Special Operations. For whatever reason, Air Force in general is the biggest cohort of folks that have usually aggressive and deadly cancers that pop up, just because they're constantly around, aircraft fuels and electronics and all kinds of other stuff and inhaling those fumes. But Air Force Special Operators were the number one cohort for per capita, which is a crazy thing. It's a travesty.
I believe it. Yeah, with all the different FLIR balls and munitions and flying and just traveling so much and getting exposed to the solar radiation, like that's gotta be.
Yeah. So, well, that brings us to our reunion, my friend, the beautiful 58th. We were on different teams at the time. Team fights were still in vogue. So unfortunately you and I had to go at it a couple times, and the Horseshoe Building at the 58th, that was always one of my favorite times of my career is, couple of phone calls to the other team room. Hey, do you guys want 20 pizzas? Like, that's it. Let's go fight them.
Yeah, I forgot about those times, and particularly the time where one of the guys was leaving and I was in the team room by myself, and
yes,
Dave and Mike.
Wasn't that when Doc was leaving?
This was when Bo Wagner.
Oh, right. Yeah. But because he was going to dive school, right?
I think so.
I think so, dude.
When I was in the room by myself.
So good.
I see the group of guys, and it actually wasn't just me. It was me and Oz, this other dude that was a very big individual, clearly could handle his own. And I was sitting in the desk and I see the group of like 5 dudes walk in. And then I was like, I know what's about to take place. And so I was like, okay. I stand up and I take my jacket off or set it on the gown or the blouse off, set it on the chair, and knew this was about to happen. And Oz stands up, looking just very stoic, just stands up and then slowly turns around and puts his hands behind his back. And I was like,
yep.
Oz, what are you doing?
Discretion is the better part of valor, my friend. You know a bait game when you see it. That's an important lesson, Stephen.
And he's like, what? We can't fight them. We can't win.
So for all those not tracking, we had a very distinct rule in Vegas, right? And it was like you were essentially like a vampire. You didn't go into another team room unless you're invited in. You didn't just all willy-nilly walk into somebody else's house. And we took that very seriously. So if you made the mistake of just walking into somebody's team room, typically what you would hear is you'd be like, hey, you want to do this the hard way? Or you want to do this the easy way? Because you're about to get rolled up. And sometimes, like, I distinctly remember my good friend Tony. His operator initials are MX. I won't put his last name out, but MX came into the team room. It was myself, David, O'Haney, and Street. We're all in there, and that was the crew. I think it was Blue Team at the time before it turned into One Troop. And man, MX walks in the room, a little bit got caught lacking a little bit, and for whatever reason, like Dave was picking handcuffs. Like we had went through like a surreptitious entry class, and Dave was like practicing picking handcuffs. And he looks at me like he's like kind of like motions to Tony, and he looks at Tony, goes, hey man, hard way or easy way? Tony like immediately puts 2 and 2 together because he's deep in the room. Like he's nowhere near the door. He can't get out. Like he's going to have to like handle this problem now. And he literally just goes, hard way. And Dave was like, I respect it. So then, we ended up tuning him up, putting his hands behind his back. And then we took his shirt and we put it over his head, like hockey style. So he had to like bounce down the hallway to get back to his team room on the other side to tell everybody what had happened, which led to a very big fight. But the funny part is that you had to pass ops in the 58th to do that. So like the DO and the ops soup and like the command section, not the command section because this is another building at that time, but the DO and the ops soup looked at Tony, and instead of being, and it was BG at the time, I think. And instead of being like, oh, what is going on, guys? This is unprofessional. They literally like, guys, there's about to be a team fight. There's about to be a team fight. And they were excited because they could see what happened. So that is the culture that we had. That was a warrior culture that we lived in. Every once in a while, man.
Yeah. We would have barbecues and hang out.
Oh, absolutely.
In that team bar there.
Yep.
Have some drinks. But yeah, so those guys as our boys walked in and Oz turned around and got handcuffed. I was like, I ain't going out like that.
Here we go.
Dude, the first dude that gets closest to me is catching one. So as Mike gets close, I kicked him right in the chest, and he goes, so he drops back a little bit and
folded him
real quick, and then everybody pounces on top of me. And of course, once Dave gets his hands on you, it's game over from there. And of course, they tied me to a chair and then handed me as a trophy to Bo as he was leaving. So I just think I can see that picture in my head of Bo, like with you in the chair, just handcuffed, like smiling, and Bo's just like, it's fantastic. There's that picture floating around somewhere.
I know. So good.
Really fun team. I really enjoyed that team, and I actually really enjoyed my time deploying there at Nels. I think that was in that time period of my stay there was the most PJ work, deployment and growth that I've had in my career was there at that unit, because
it
was always taking in some new guys, teaching them, the very important things, even the young crows that were coming up. Okay, this is what I really need you to do on this deployment. So went out on the deployment out to Bagram. For the most part, we did a lot of patient transfers, but when we started doing, pre-positions.
Mm-hmm.
I was always fighting to do some of those just because it was a little bit, it was further away from the flagpole.
Sure.
It was a little bit more freedom to make the decisions that we needed to make in combat setting. So always, those pre-positions were always up in northeastern Afghanistan, and those things were always, at some point, something was going on. One of those FOBs in the northeastern portion, in the Konar area was just, it was a very violent area. So had a lot of opportunities to do some PJ stuff there and enjoy myself on that deployment.
Yeah.
And then came back from that one and was really quick turning. I came back from that deployment and we actually got extended for 2 months there because the volcano in Iceland had erupted and disrupted a lot of the travel out of there. And so we had gotten delayed for about 2 months coming back. And I think this was probably the first time where I started experiencing more of the classic like post-traumatic stress symptoms of we were coming back and we were staying at a hotel in Baltimore or something like that, in Maryland, staying overnight. And we went out and had some drink somewhere else, came back, and I was going to get a little nightcap to go back to the room. And in the hotel, it was actually a pretty nice hotel. There was like a little sign at the door, to the bar, and it said, it's a private party. I'm just going to go up to the bar and I'm going to buy myself a drink. I'm a paying customer here. I'm just going to buy myself
in and out, smash and grab job, no big deal.
Yeah, I was like, I go up to the bar and I'm like, hey, I just want to grab like a Stella or something. And they're like, oh, we can put it on the tab. I was like, no, I'll pay for it. I'm not part of this party. And then some guy comes up and is like, what part of what department are you from? And I was like, I'm not from a department. I just got back from Afghanistan. I was just deployed and I was just trying to get a drink and go to my room. And then some other dude comes up and he's like, hey, who's this? And she's like, oh, it's a guy that's freeloading and trying to take free beer. And I was like, hold on a second. I'm not drinking free beer. I'm paying for it. I just handed her my card. I just want to get a drink. Just got back from a long deployment yesterday, or tonight. And I just want to go to my room, relax, and go to bed. And, I have a little bit longer hair. And this fella looks at me and goes, you're lying. And I was like, excuse me? He's like, you're lying. You're not in the military. And I was like, are you joking with me right now, man? And that was like just immediate switch. And I think I get this pent up anger from that deployment, from a lot of decisions that were made by leaders in that deployment. And, some folks that had passed away and some things that we had done and seen. And I was like, look, man, I'm not lying. Don't freaking call me a liar. You have no clue what I'm just coming back from. One of my team leaders or my team commander was next to me, and one of the other guys was next to me. And he's like, you're a freaking liar. My dad was in the military. And I looked over at the two dudes that were with me, and they just nodded, and I smashed those dudes.
That's it. I'll tell you what, man, there are some things like when it's time, like when it's one of those things that you cannot possibly explain to anybody else. You and I know this feeling intimately when you know where this is going, and you're so willing to go to violence because we live a violent existence. Like the fact that, we have been, it sounds corny, but we have been trained to flip that switch 0 to 10 from just trying to get a drink to I'm going to beat you to death because you couldn't just leave me alone. So now you get these consequences and then sleep like a baby afterwards. You're like, whatever. But that feeling, that distinct feeling of looking at your bros and they just like, well, yep, sorry, this is happening now. Like, and it's funny that we started talking off about team fights. Like I will, in a playful fashion, go punch my friend in their mouth because they walked into my team room. Like that is the life that we live. And this poor guy that's some tech nerd in Baltimore, at the Inner Harbor, decided to call you a liar and just wandered into this world that he has no conception of at all. And it's, having those things bend up, the pent up anger and, having the frustration that you felt, man, like, man, I feel that a lot. That's, when you see vets that, get into road rage incidents, or when you have people that have those outbursts of anger, because of that past trauma. It's hard for people to understand where they're like, why did you get so mad at a video game? Like, why did you put your hand through a wall over a parking ticket? You know, why did you do these? Why did you get into a fight at a bar over a drink? You could have just been like, well, yeah, I am. Or you could have just shown them your ID card and went on. That's not the point, man. It's the principle of what happened. And I refuse to allow that in my presence. And unfortunately, like, violence, it may not be the right problem solving option, but violence is always a problem solving option.
Yeah. So, you know, and fortunately we were really good with the security dudes there, and they came over and they, you know, they're like, hey, can you keep this out? And they're like, no, like, they looked at me and was like, hey, what do you want to do? And I was like, I just want to get my drink and I want to go to my room.
I already paid for it. Just give me the Stella. I'm obviously very, very hoity-toity drinking a Stella in Baltimore, Maryland.
Yeah, and I was like, just let me go to my room and relax. And so they're like, okay, cool. And you know, I'm not condoning violence, but I think this I want to, I guess, identify that this is the start.
It's a symptom. Violence. So, yeah, violence isn't an okay thing. Violence is a symptom of a deeper issue that was going on.
Yeah, something was taking place. I solved the problem, and it worked. Like it was a quick. I can get loud and I can get violent, and it worked. And so, as I came back from that deployment, you know, after every deployment, I actually take like 2 weeks of not going anywhere. Like, I don't want to go to the restaurants and hear people complain about their food that's being serviced to them. I don't want to hear about like this is taking too long, or whining about lines and whatnot. Like, I don't want to hear any of that stuff because I'll fly off the handle. And so I would come back. I came back from that one in like December, like right before Christmas, and then we were deploying again in like April or May, and this was out to Bastion. Yeah,
and to frame it for everybody, the 58th at this time. So Steve was another troop chief, and I was. So you were the 3 troop chief. I was the 1 troop chief. When we had 3 troops, and I would follow Steve on all of his deployments. So during this thing, we went through a period of, you know, there were 4 years, and we were the Christmas troop. So 1 troop was the Christmas troop. We deployed the exact same time, every single year, every single time. Like, we were the troop, we were the rescue unit that was deploying at this time. And it was for a bunch of other things, some of them admin and some of them sort of like positioning. And a lot of good things came out of it. But what I will tell you is that, like, we deployed every year. You get home, you take about a month off, you get right back into the training cycle. You'd get some new dudes. You'd be like, all right, new dudes, you got to figure this out. We're only going to do basics because we got 6 months and we're leaving. That's it. And that's what we did for 4 years.
Yeah, absolutely. So I took a few weeks off and then started prepping my team. I knew I was getting a whole brand new team. And in fact, one of the guys that's in this picture right here behind me, you know, one of my favorites to do for when I meet the new team, number 1 was to establish dominance early and often.
Nice. Just like prison. Good.
I would do this in a way, and I was a dickhead back then. But they would set up. I heard that my guys I was going to deploy with my team, they were out at the tower and they were getting taught the typical one man's, you know,
standard
of rope rescue, and you know, it's just an exercise of setting up a rope, going down, putting a dude in a harness or a litter, and then ascending that rope, hauling them up, then doing a changeover to lower them back down while a rope is weighted. I was like, man, it's a good exercise to practice, you know, some certain techniques, but what I care more about is problem solving and being able to creative solutions. So I went out there and I was like, hold on, what do you guys use as a rappel device? And they're like, oh, ATC. And I was like, okay, I want you guys to rappel down, tie off on an ATC, and then untie yourself and continue your descent. So they started off and they get about like, you know, 3/4 of the way down. I was like, okay, stop right there, tie off. And they tied off a certain way that you tie with a different technique. And when they tied off, I was like, okay, cool. And in my bad scientist brain, I'm like,
got him.
They made their mistake.
Walked right into my trap.
Exactly. And they got themselves stuck and they couldn't undo it. And I was like, here you guys are working on some more advanced skills, and you can't even figure out how to get down a rope and stop your descent, and then continue it. I was like, how are you going to rescue somebody or do this whole scenario that you're planning when you can't even use the equipment that you use, that you carry with you on target? And then I got in the car and left.
Savage.
And so those fellas did not appreciate me. They did not like me. And they told me afterwards that they had some drinks and they're like, F Steve, and doing shots and stuff like that. But then I started to grow on them as far as like, these are just lessons learned that I went through. And, I'm gonna guide you down. I'm gonna break you down, and then I'm gonna build you back up in this fashion. So we went out to Bastion, in the summertime, and typically in the summertime, that's the fighting season. You got fighting season between like May and September. August and July are pretty hot. So I was a very active deployment. Where we were running, between 3 to 6 missions a day, and we would run anywhere between like somebody fell off something or got a cat scratch or a scorpion sting to a mass casualty, which we had a couple of those mass casualties out there, and that's what this picture is from.
Yeah,
treating a bunch of dudes on the ground out there, but a very, very good experience as far as PJ stuff. And problem solving and deciding who was going to be where, what gear were we going to carry, why were we going to bring something out on target, and then just getting the guys' experience. What I always enjoyed was watching people, just watching everybody. Whether I gave ketamine, I like to see when that would hit them and when they would enter into a different dimension, how long that would take. Our new guys, when they showed up, what was going to bother them or where their mindset was. Where typically when there was a missing limb or an amputee of some sort, we'd bring them on, and their typical reaction of the first mission of seeing something like this is to just sit there and just stare and go. And then it's like, I give them like that 5 seconds of like taking it in and like, this is not moulage. This is a real human with their bones sticking out of their leg, and then slap them in the head and go.
And oh, by the way, they need your help. So I need you to act now.
Yeah, it's time to do work, and it's time to make things happen. So I like to I guess enable them to perform at their best, and then making good decisions. Whether we did stuff on training. There's a lot of things that you do in training versus that you do in real life. Like in training, you're flying out to a target and you're hanging out of the helicopter like as far as you can go. Like, man, I can see, I got eyes on, I can see better than the pilot. And in real life, you ain't hanging out there.
You ain't, no.
One of our crows was sticking his head out to look, and pulled him back. And this was actually on one of our days. It was a lot of shooting going on. And as soon as we pulled him back in, like rounds just started impacting the aircraft. One hitting the chin bubble of the pilot and right in between the seat. That aircraft that day, I got shot out so much that they could no longer fly it. And that was a pretty good mass casualty that was taking place, and a lot of sniper fire on the ground and whatnot. So a lot of things that you do in training that you wouldn't do in real life. Right.
Yeah. And those lessons are paid in blood. And a guy that I graduated my pipeline with is an amputee now for that exact reason. Getting off an aircraft and catches one of those shots in the leg. And Augie is a beast of a man, and he's killed himself, literally just absolutely destroyed himself to get to where he is, today. And he's a modern miracle in a lot of different reasons. But those are those lessons that we learned. So we turned you over on that deployment, and we took over the alert down there in Bastion, and we lost another teammate. This one was tough. As I was lifting with BC, one of my mentors and one of my best friends in the gym, and he was like, "Hey man, we lost somebody back home." And I was like, "What do you? I'm not tracking that. What do you mean?" And he was like, "Yeah, we lost B-Rob, dude." And I distinctly remember lifting with him in the gym, and we went out Advon, BC and I, so that we could turn over and we could get the lay of the land, we could figure out what's going on, and then we'd welcome the team in and get right into operations, which we did. Our first mission was less than 72 hours after the main body got in. Like, we had to go do something. It was a pretty sporty mission too. I messed that timing up. So that was Bagram, not Bastion. But turning over for you and losing B-Rob at the 58th was another one of those really, really hard times that I remember. And it was another one of those things where I distinctly remember, lifting in the gym with BC and just being like, shit, man, like we're here in Afghanistan. It's our job to see these terrible things and to go do, try to manage chaos and try to be there for people and, doing hero transfers and, really, doing a lot of patient transfers that you're like, you don't need me for this. And then on the other end of it, doing stuff that we're like, you needed me for this 2 hours ago. Why didn't you call me then? Right. And trying to find out how that works. And I just remember being just absolutely blown away by this young man that was killed at home, stateside, in a motorcycle accident and hearing about B-Rob, dying. That was in October. Man, that was a really, really hard thing to deal with because everybody else was going through it back home. Like you guys were going through it back home. And we were just out there trying to go to work. It was really crazy.
Yeah. Him. And I don't know if you knew Tyler Kanab.
I did. Yeah. Tyler was on my flight initially. And then, I can't remember why Tyler left the flight, and didn't go with us. Like when the reshuffle happened, it was like, but then when we were just ships in the night, like we would see each other in the evening, we'd be like, oh crap, you still work here. Oh, you still work here. What's up, dude? Yeah. Yeah.
Very unfortunate story there. And just such a nice guy, one of the nicest guys that I ever met, and then turned into this, whatever demons got a hold of him and doing some terrible things and ultimately killing himself. So that, several teammates that we lost. I don't know if you're David Goodale.
Yeah.
Flashbang, his life. So, but that all leads to, the things that the traumas over time, as we went from, doing these missions and it's not like we're going out and, very few times are you getting off the bird and shooting and engaging and shooting your gun.
Right.
Your goal as a PJ, as a rescue PJ, is to get in and out of there as fast as possible because the mission is to get that injured individual back to the hospital as fast as possible. So I was trying to be as efficient as I could getting people in and out of there. So very rarely do we get to engage. And a few times we did get to shoot at some people and whatnot. But that's not what the trauma was. It's going from I'm FaceTiming or Skyping my wife at the time and then we get a scramble call to go and hop on the helicopters and we're flying and heading straight towards whatever the event is. And I go do that event and then I come back and I have no interest in talking to my family again. And it's just like straight up, straight down, straight up, straight down. And then you're doing that for 4 to 6 months every day. There was no days off. You weren't getting like, some people that worked at the hospital and you go drop patients off and you chat with them a little bit. They're like, oh yeah, we're doing like salsa night at this place. I'm like, salsa night?
You weren't even allowed to leave the tent. They would bring your food over, the merms. They would bring them over in huge, crappy Tupperware containers, and you would eat lukewarm food out of the merms for every meal that you worked over there because you couldn't leave because you were on alert.
And that was me as a team leader, that was such a sacred time period because sometimes we would be out on a mission, right? And we're coming back and they'd say, we got another mission coming down the pipe. And I'm like, God dang, my boys haven't eaten yet. And so we go do that other mission and we come back and there's nothing. Like the people that could have left the compound and gone to the chow hall went and ate our, because it was like a chicken leg day and went and ate the only food that we were capable of having. So we come back and you're eating, those little cups of cereal or and sometimes you'd go on a mission and, an IED or a helicopter crash and you had just picked up some burnt bodies or some burnt up limbs and whatnot and blown apart. And I have no interest in eating ribs or, some chicken because I just picked off of this dead body over here. So there's that as well as far as, coming back and trying to eat. But that was always a sacred time. If anybody ever we had an individual try to schedule some training during our lunch period after we had come back from a mission. And this canine handler or doc or vet came up with this, doll or this doll dog.
Right. Yeah.
He's like, yeah, we're going to do some canine training. And I was like, oh, that's a hard no. It's a hard pass. I don't know who set that up, but this is lunchtime for my guys. We don't miss lunch because we don't know when we're going to get an opportunity to have this warm meal, because we might just get a call right now and we'd have to be off the ground in under 8 minutes.
Right.
And the dude didn't seem too thrilled about it. I was like, not my problem.
Yeah. Sounds like you, problem guy. Take your little doll and get the F out of my tent.
Yeah. And so I think in that I started to get, as we all do towards the end of that deployment, you start to get a little jaded, morale,
A little cynical.
Find ways to keep morale high. And there were some other investigations that were taking place that had nothing to do with us, but it was still affecting us.
Mm-hmm.
And to keep my team, tell this story and another one, and then we'll move on to some other stuff. But to keep my team, at least having fun, we would typically leave the barracks or wherever we're staying, like at 2 a.m. or something like that, or maybe midnight, because it was 12-hour shifts. We needed to be there at like a certain time, whatever.
Yep. What were you guys? Was it sevens? Were you guys still working sevens, like on the sevens? Or no, I was working sevens because BC and I were splitting. It was on. Were you 12s?
I think it was. I think it was like ones or something.
Yeah, ones or something weird. Yeah, and what we're talking about, everybody's like Steve was saying, there is no time off. You got 2 teams that are working in a 24-hour shift, right? So you each go through 12, and depending on the battle rhythm, you would tweak it, and you would figure out when you could split like the busiest times, so that one team wasn't just getting absolutely destroyed during the daytime, and then the other time wasn't doing anything at night, or vice versa. So what you would do is one team would start at 1 o'clock in the morning, and the other team would relieve them at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and you would switch. So when we're talking about on the 12s or on the ones, or I've worked on the 10s before too, because the battle rhythm in that area was, hey, from 10 to 10, essentially splits the workload of the time that is busy. So that's what we're talking about there. All right. Sorry, Steve. I just had to explain it.
And so, the morale was low, and one of the guys was like, hey, can I do some donuts? In this gravel parking lot, we have this little gate, and it's like this little golf cart type of thing. And I was like, yeah, go ahead and rip some donuts. Whatever, dude.
Sure.
Like, we're like almost done. We got a few weeks left. Just rip it, and then we'll head in. So he's ripping these donuts, and we hop in the vehicle and then go in. And then our bosses show up and call in me and my team commander. And they're like, so how'd the morning go? And I gave him a rundown of, we had like 3 or 4 missions already. This is what we did and whatnot. And he's like, what about before that? And I was like, we had breakfast, we did some training, and watched Game of Thrones. Mm-hmm. Stay in the morning. He's like, what about
standard family stuff?
And he's like, what about before that? And I was like, we drove in. What about right before that? And I was like, we woke up. Okay, in driving and waking up, what did you guys do? And I was like, would you do you know what we did?
Right, yeah. That's there's a very by the way, everybody's been to SEER, everybody has interrogation training, everybody is a smart person in the room. So now you're playing the game of like, why what do you know? Is there anything that maybe you want to talk about, or how are you feeling today? What did you do this morning?
He's like, so did you guys have a little bit of fun? And I was like, all right.
We always have fun.
Yeah, I was like,
it's a fun team, sir.
Yeah, it's a fun team. But we did some donuts in the parking lot. And he's like, yeah, your guys' rocks kicked up and hit the truck. That's how close I was to you guys. I was like, I didn't see it. He's like, why? And I was like, well, sir, the morale is low. The morale is so low right now that I'm willing to do stuff that we probably shouldn't do, in a safe manner, to keep the guys from losing their minds. We have investigations going on over here. They're not allowed to leave this area. Like, they're getting accused of things they've never done. I'm trying to do the best that I can to at least get these boys to have some fun and let off some steam. Because outside of working out, they got nothing. And it's hard to get these guys to enjoy some things
right.
And so he's like, okay, understood. And then we stepped out of there. And he's like, you know what, I'm going to have to punish you. And I was like, all right. And so we step out, and the team commander that I was with, the crow that I was with, he was freaking out. He's like, oh, they're going to send us back home. They're going to fire me and this and that. And I was like, look, man, they're not going to fire you. I was like, this, nobody knows about it but them. That, like, if anything, like, if they sent us home, then they'd have to say, hey, we have a problem within the ranks. And that would be not ideal. They're going to take care of it in-house, which is fine. Like, your future's safe. It's fine. Like, plus we're so close to turnover, it's not going to matter.
Mm-hmm.
And so they come up with a punishment like, "Oh, you guys gonna whoever was doing the donuts is gonna bury a tire." So then to like for the gym or something like that, so you can now hit this tire that's like buried.
Sure.
And I was like, "All right, well, no, not that person. We'll all do it because it was a team out there. It was a team event. We'll all do this." So all of us were out there just burying like 5 different tires and turned it into a team building event, and it was still fun. Like we had some fun, and now we got punished for it, and we're having more fun. So.
Well, that's how you steal their soul, man. You take their event that you're supposed to be sad and contrite over. Oh, by the way, this is a throwaway. You had 4 missions by the time that they decided to tell you that, the Bobs and their clean uniforms and their good smelling after the shower and their wet clue and their air conditioning, they deigned to bring you into their office to tell you like how you like your actions didn't reflect great credit upon yourself and the United States Air Force. And you're like, okay, well, we're going to take your punishment. We're going to turn it into a team building exercise, and we're going to laugh while you're doing it because this doesn't matter. I got shot at earlier and a couple people died this week that I didn't want to die. So how about you just shut up?
Yeah. Well, the thing is, like, the individual that pulled us in, I really enjoy him. He's actually a really great leader. He's one of my favorites. And so I respected his position and where he could have sent us home, and he could have done a lot of things. And it's somebody very greatly and respect very fondly as well. So, and I respect him because of a couple of missions that we did have that could have cost some lives that he was able to back me up on it. And I was very appreciative of his efforts there. But that was just a way to keep the team, risks that we were willing to take to keep the team happy. And one of those in particular. For example, the thing that I got upset about that he backed me up was there was an IED we watched happen right off base. And I was like, oh, it's only a matter of time before we get this call. We fly out there, go pick this Marine up, double amputee. And I'm sorry, we weren't, that was a different one. We're coming back from a flight, and they had said that there's another mission coming. And I was like, can you send the 9 line? At least these lines so we know where it is. And they're like, why don't you just land and we'll hand you the piece of paper. I was like, okay, it might not be, we'll get gas and then it won't be, it's not too life-threatening. They can wait. Land, and somebody hands me a piece of paper, and I was like, this is a Cat Alpha with double amputee and massive hemorrhaging. Why are we sitting here? Why do we not get this? Somebody was flying around like spike blood. Let's get this guy. So we pick this guy up, come back in. And the first thing that the talk is like, man, like what a life saved. And I was fuming. They were like, yeah, we saved lives, and they're like high fiving themselves and back patting themselves. And I kicked the door open, and obviously the symptom of like where I'm at, I'm fuming, and I lose it on the intel on the whole talk itself for the rock. And I was like, look. Like, it's all fun and games in here for you guys and your air conditioning. You guys get to print out pieces of the paper and feel like you're a part of things and part of the combat and war. There's a helicopter out there full of blood because of a guy that may die because we spent more time handing me a piece of paper rather than us going straight to where we needed to go to pick this guy up. And we lost, 5 to 10 minutes that he needed. He desperately needed that 5 to 10 minutes. And I'm in here. And you guys are sitting here celebrating and high-fiving and handshaking while my guys are taking care of picking up all the pieces out there. And I was fuming. And I went over to that same commander and was like, hey, just so you know, I lost my cool in the rock. And this is what happened. And told him what happened. And I was like, what are you going to do? And he's like, I'm going to go follow up that anger with more anger on why that took place. And so that I had a lot of respect for his decision to back me up in that. And rather than say I shouldn't have done what I did, he actually supported that decision, and then just to show you, I'll tell this last one, because it just shows you like the mindset of some of these leaders in some of these organizations or some of these who are controlling these big moving parts where they have no sense of where they're at in combat. We're coming back from a mass casualty. and the helicopter had been shot up so many times it's no longer flyable. They have to send it back. And me and my guys are on the helicopter. We took our helmet off and just clipped it on the top there. And we're sitting there kind of leaning back, just thinking our lucky stars were alive. And come and land. And as we're kind of cleaning some things up, there's blood all over the floor of the aircraft. And one of the guys walks over, one of our guys, and he's like, "Hey man, you guys okay? Everything good?" And I was like, "Yeah, man, I don't think that was a wild mission. This helo got shot up a bunch. We got a bunch of cleaning to do. We're gonna help load up our stuff. This is right at changeover. Shift changeover will help load up some new stuff to replace everything that we used." And he's like, "Okay, cool. The colonel over there, he noticed some of you guys hadn't shaved. So can you guys make sure you shave? And also when you're flying in, can you make sure you wear your helmet when you're coming in and landing?" And this is several months into this, and I'm hearing this guy, and I look at him, I look at the guy telling me this, and I was like, "That guy said that?" And he's like, "Yeah." And I was like, "Okay, a little bit of advice: don't ever come at me with that kind of stuff ever again, especially after we just almost got killed. Second, I'm gonna go lose it. I'm gonna go kill this guy."
Second, you did that.
Yeah.
That's your fault.
I had no cares that I was going to lose my job. I didn't care at that moment. I was like, it was just a flip of like, I'm going to go lose it. So I went to go walk. He's like, "Oh, stop. I'll message received. I'll make sure I'll smooth it over." And whatnot. I was like, "Brother, you cannot ever come at me with that kind of dumb comments about my team again. Like, and if you do, just different time. Choose a different time, bud. While we're cleaning up blood out of the aircraft and or taking everything off because it's got to go into a new one. Like, not now." So that's just like another symptom of like, man, like things are starting to pile up. Because when I went, after that deployment, I went pretty much straight from there. You guys replaced us, and I left from there to go to selection because I knew after your deployment that they were going to shut down. They were going to shut down Bastion. They were going to shut down a lot of the places that we were deploying to that were points of injury that were really getting to combat. And I was in my mid-20s, and I'm like, I still got a lot of fighting. I still got things to do. I'm enjoying this combat. And the only place that's doing combat, even though I redacted my package many years ago, the only place that's still doing it is at 24th. So I'm going to reapply. And they happen to still have my old package, and they're like, "Yeah, come on out." And I was like, "Well, I'm in Afghanistan right now." And they're like, "We'll fly a plane out to come get you." And I was like, "Hold on a second. Let me figure this out. I'll make sure I'm there, but it's my lineup." And
And just for everybody out there, that was my deployment to Bastion was the last Bastion deployment. We no kidding broke tents down, and we were made the final radio call for alert, and then the Bastion, which is in Helmand, so it was southern Afghanistan. Rescue was not there anymore. That was not a thing. That was when we bounced out. So our unit closed that bad boy down. So Steve's deployment and then mine, and that was it. So, and then you make the move to North Carolina.
Yeah, and if we would have had more of those, if those were continuing on, I would not have applied because I really enjoyed doing that. That was PJ stuff, and I did a lot of PJ stuff. Yes. A lot of things that very unique circumstances of like, okay, I got to problem solve this as a team leader. Mm-hmm. But those were going away. So the only option was for me to go to the 24th and continue fighting. The only place that was continually fighting at any moment, could be in a fight. So I reinstated my package. I told my family, this is my decision, and got their support to do that, with the understanding once I leave the 24th that my wife can choose where she goes next, or where we go next as a family. And so I said, yeah, I think this is what I got to do, is just to continue scratching the itch. And left there pretty much straight. Landed in Vegas, packed up my stuff out of the cage, and pretty much hopped in another plane and flew out to North Carolina almost that same day, and or the day after, and started the selection. And the selection's a lot different now than it was then. we had 15 of us, 6 of us ended up getting picked up. And it was probably one of the hardest. It was the hardest selection I've ever done, but because I was so unprepared for it and physically unprepared for it, because we were limited on Bastion. If you remember that loop around the helicopter, you have to be on a radio. You can't walk that whole loop on the radio to do service. So you'd have to, in order for me to ruck, I would have to go, like halfway there and halfway back.
Yeah.
Just doing these ridiculous half moon shapes.
And you'd have to do that 700 times to get to like any sort of mileage. Yeah, it was awful.
Exactly. And so I had gone, I would do that for like 2 or 3 hours, and then a mission would come up, and I would drop my stuff and hop on the mission, and we'd go do whatever we were doing. And then generally I'd be like, well, I don't want to go back to rucking. I don't want to go back to doing that stuff. Like I need to be now mentally prepared for the fight. I need to be physically prepared for whatever is going to come my way. And I can't be, 10 hours or 8 hours into a ruck and, hurting right when I need to be fresh for the fight. So I did not, in lieu of having time, I added weight and I don't ever ruck. So I was like rucking with like 100+ pound bags for like 2 or 3 hours and just walking back and forth, just destroying my body. Like this, I'm getting harder. This is really going to help out. And it didn't help at all.
Right. Yeah. It's the DJ, that would be the DJ record scratch. But let me tell you, it did not help out.
Yeah, it did not. And,
but you made it, you got picked up and you made the move to North Carolina.
That's right. So we went through the selection and as these guys that all spent a lot more time preparing, when we started the ruck, the individual ruck, they all sat down and they're putting on, like, they took off their socks. They're putting on these different things and like taping their feet up. And I was like, what are these guys doing?
Boy, these guys are all idiots. I'm the only smart one.
I was like, I don't know what they're doing. I'm not going to try something new and then have it like you regret it. So I did sock, boot, and walk. And so I put my socks on, put my boots on, and I started just walking. And my feet were killing. And I didn't stop. I was like, I'm not going to be the first to stop until I saw one of the guys that I was going through selection with. He was stopped on the side, and I was behind him. And I was like, oh, thank goodness he stopped. And so I stopped next to him and changed out my socks, put them on my ruck. And then we get to a portion where we're going through like some brush, and my socks obviously disappear. So those are gone. And so I've only got the pair that I have. And so by the end of it, I had 2 blisters, one on the bottom of my left, one on the bottom of my right foot, but it was the entire bottom of my feet.
It was one solid blister, but it was the entire bottom of both of my feet. Perfect.
Like 500 cc saline bags, but it felt like walking holding glass. It was awful. So finished that. I was thankful to get picked up. And I went into that, for those of you that are striving for that pathway, I went into that feeling like this is as good as I'm going to be for this particular section. If I don't get picked up here, I have made every effort as a skill-wise and mentally prepared for this journey into this career field, into this pathway of our career field. If I don't get picked up, it's because I'm just not good enough, and I'm just or I just don't fit there. But this is as good as I'm going to get. I don't want to say as good as I'm going to get, but this is the highest performing level. I'm coming right out of the deployment. I'm feeling fresh.
Right.
At least as far as skill set go. I just need to survive the physical aspect, and really, don't quit. It's all comes down to just don't quit. So finish that, and then I come back and I bring up a lot of those trauma symptoms, because when I come back, and I come back to kids, my kids were pretty young at the time. I had 2 boys at the time. And what had worked in other circumstances, other instances of getting loud and getting angry and getting physical, that was the go-to. That was like, I knew what the result was going to be. So I was more stressed out with kids crying and whining and screaming than I was getting shot at. Like,
Right.
or going on a mission. Like, I knew I could handle myself on a mission. Like, training kicks in, I can just plug holes, I can engage, I can do whatever. That was easy for me to focus on and take care of. I could not problem solve my kids. I could not,
because you couldn't use the same tools. You only had one when all you have is a hammer, every problem looks like a nail, and you just didn't have the tools to even deal with that sort of stress. And that's stressful in and of itself. Like, because then you're adding in this other dynamic of, it's not just, it's what you're talking about is trying to guide a human to be a good man. Mm-hmm. Like, people struggle with that. That's a mighty endeavor for anyone at any time. And oh, by the way, you have all of this other stuff. Yeah. When I was doing that time in Vegas, where it was just constant deployments and training and never there, man, I was never really home and I was never really gone. Mm-hmm. When I was deployed, I was missing my family and missing my kids. And I had 2 kids, during that entire time too. And, missing my wife at the time. And but when I was home, man, I wasn't there. I was thinking about the next trip. I was trying to get ready for the next go. I was coming off the last TDY and I was training and making, the next year's training plan and doing all of that other stuff. So you're never really anywhere. You're just inside of your head. So when you have that dynamic of, now I'm trying to be a good father. How do I be a good father? How do I be a good dad to these young men in your case? And, my son and my daughter and mine, how does that work? And it can be, man, it can be a stress all in and of itself, but even worse, it can make the other symptoms worse. It can bring up feelings that you don't necessarily think are connected, but it can make them worse, and it can highlight them, and it can bring them to the forefront.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I think you hit the nail on the head with, you're not, like, you're home, but yeah, I'm thinking about, as a team leader, as a leader, like, I got to take care of my guys. I got a training cycle to plan out. I've got the next group, the next deployment. So all of that stuff. And then, trying not to, I guess, think about this stuff that we, the deployments and the people we lost and whatnot, like, trying to remember them in a positive light and not be angry all the time. So, so I would get, those 3 things of getting loud, physical and angry. Those would be the quick go-tos with the kids, and it would stop them from doing whatever they were doing, whatever crying, whatever fighting that they were doing, whatever it was. And, and I never hit the kids, but I would push them into like a corner or something like that, or up against a wall. It would be intimidation. And, it hurts to say that even out loud right now, because that got the results. And it wasn't until after several deployments at the 24th, and at the 24th, and then even now at the other units, there's a huge, a robust team of specialists, physical therapists, and psychologists, and strength conditioning coaches and nutritionists that are working to keep you operating and continue deploying and doing the thing that you want to do, right? The thing that we all want to do is deploy and do our jobs. And one of the psychologists was putting on like a little educational class. And I asked, what do people come to? And it was about PTSD. And I was like, I don't know what that actually means. Like, we see it in the TVs and we see it on the movies. And I don't have those symptoms of, like, waking up in the middle of the night in a cold sweat with my hands, like, choking my wife or something. I don't have that. Like, I'm not paranoid all the time. At least I didn't think so. And I thought I was just like normal. This is what normal looks like, because everybody around me was just like that. They would, get angry fast or whatever. They'd flip a switch. This is who we are. We're being dads, and this is who we are as operators. This is the life we live. And what was really concerning to me, for the most part, was I was having a hard time remembering people. Like, I couldn't remember people that I'd known for like a decade. I couldn't remember their names. I knew their faces. It was like, I don't know their name. Like, I'd be talking to one of the guys at the unit that I'd known for 10 years. And I was like, I don't know what his name is. And so that was a concern. So I asked, like, hey, what do people come to talk to you about? I'm like, well, all kinds of things. Usually it's relationship stuff. I was like, okay, well, I have a few of those. But I have memory problems. I want to get like a MRI and do some cognitive testing. And really, my cognitive testing came back fine. And what the biggest thing they found was that my attention span, or I had a lack of attentiveness. And they're like, well, that's really indicative of PTSD. And I was like, I don't have that.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. And continued on deploying and training. And I was like, I guess I don't have like the gnarly TBIs that I thought I did, or at least the brain injuries I thought I did, even though I experienced a lot of micro TBIs and explosions nearby, but nothing significantly damaging my brain that would cause those memory losses. And came back from a deployment and a training cycle, and my wife had sat me down in this. Now we've got 2 kids and a daughter, and my boys were 9 and 7 at the time. And she's like, well, I don't want to make you upset or anything, but like your 2 boys are scared of you and they want to look up to you, but they're terrified of you. And man, that was like a kick in the gut. I'm like, here I am. I'm supposed to be their protector. I'm supposed to be the one that they can lean to and come to with any problem. I'm supposed to save them from the monster, but I was ultimately the monster that they needed saving from. And so that was a really hard thing for me to hear, but I was really grateful that she had sat me down and told me that. And I knew it was probably hard for her to say.
Yeah, I can't even imagine. Like,
who knows how I would have reacted. You know, she didn't know what it was going to be when she said those words. And so I was in a place where I could hear it, I could listen to it and acknowledge it. So then I did seek out the therapist and go, well, what is going on? And I was very resistant at first, and then started talking quite a bit and explaining like just the things that I've gone through, and more so the ups and downs of deploying as many times as we did and going on the missions that we did. And everybody's different. You know, there's several guys and gals that have seen a lot more than I have, and they have different traumatic experiences than I do, and nobody's traumatic experiences was like worse than somebody else's. You know, it's just how they perceive it and how they react to it. So, seeking that help was really good for me, and then I was able to kind of acknowledge what I was going through, and I stayed on the teams. So fortunately, at this unit, like I was able to talk to them and explain everything, and then get some guidance and some treatment tools, and not be put on medications and stay on the teams. And so I was a team leader on one of the teams at the 24th, and set up a climbing trip to go out to Boise, Idaho, and we had 5 of us going out there, and it was more of a morale trip to kind of bring the team together after a deployment. We're getting ready to start an alert cycle and a training cycle. And so I wanted to get the team to be working cohesively, and climbing is always a really fun experience to do that. Put people out of their comfort zone. On the second day, one of our guys had set up a rappel line, probably so. They had set up a line to do some lead climbing. One of our guys climbed up, sort of belaying everybody up from the top, doing some top rope stuff and belaying everybody from the top. And it was about a 70-foot face, single pitch. Everybody pretty much gets up there. I'm the last one to start climbing. One of our guys sets up another lane on this, pretty much adjacent to that initial climbing lane. That's probably about 10 feet apart. And as the first guy starts his rappel and his descent, I'm climbing up. And I get to the top, and I'm doing a little bit of instruction on what I like to do and how I like to set up traditional anchors using camming devices and whatnot. And I hadn't seen what he had set up. And as I'm going through that instruction with one of the younger guys, or the newer guys on the team, he's not young or new to the career field. He's new to the team, and just going through just what I like to do. And second guy starts his rappel. He feels the anchor shift a little bit, and he's like, "Hey, we good, man?" And they look at the individual looks at the anchor again. And he's like, "Yeah, man, we're good. It's like everything looks fine. Everything was just setting in harder, so it's gonna be harder to get out." And that made sense because it's pretty typical of nuts and cams. And so he starts his descents, gets about halfway down, and then it sounded like a shotgun blast kind of explosion behind us, behind me, one of the other guys. And I turn and I see rope kind of zooming by, and the anchor or at least the rock that was around the anchor pieces, shattered. And so one side shattered and weighted that one, shock loaded it, and then shattered the next one. And so the rope started going. The guy that was on the rope fell halfway down, so like 30 feet or so, and hit some of the rocks below. And one of the guy that set up the anchor was doing what he was trying to do, which is tie into the anchor itself. So with him being tied in, the weight of the individual was on the rope pulled the other one off. So he was like resisting as much as he could, but the individual's greater than 200 pounds, and there's nothing you can do once it's shock loads like that. He went over the edge, got pulled off, and it looked like he got whipped off. And so I'll never forget watching him fall, looking at where he wanted to land. Ultimately flipped over onto his back, impacted the ground, bounced over, and I could hear kind of like air kind of rushing out, like a grunt. And in my head, I'm just calculating the injuries that he probably has. I'm thinking he's alive, but we're gonna need life flight. We're gonna need to get him on a backboard of some sort. Like, what are my ways of getting him out of here?
Right.
Probably have to put an airway in him. I'm just going through all the treatment modalities in my head. Rappel down and as I'm rappelling, ask one of the guys that's on the ground to go over and check a pulse and listen for breathing. And yells up, he doesn't have any, or he lost the pulse. He had a pulse and lost it. And he can't hear him breathing. And I said, keep holding it there. Check him again. Don't roll him. Don't move him yet until I get there. I was like, yeah, I don't have anything. Told the other guy to call 911. Got to the bottom and then rolled. I went and checked myself, and I didn't have anything. Rolled him over and checked again, and still didn't have anything. And that's when we started executing our med plan of starting CPR. I tried to put in an airway through an ET tube, and ultimately had to cric him because that failed twice. And then one of the other guys did a finger thoracotomy, cut a hole in his chest. You can see he had a really significant hemopneumo or hemothorax. All the blood just poured out, like about a liter of blood. Closed that back up, didn't have blood to replace, so I didn't want to drain out a bunch of blood. And just kept working him for about 25 minutes, until the fire department ultimately got there. And didn't have a life flight, wasn't able to launch life flight. They didn't have a hoist. So a lot of things that I wish we could have had, but ultimately the injuries that were sustained were not survivable, even if you landed on an OR table.
Right.
And so I had lost a lot of teammates in combat. And, throughout the years that, like B-Rob in an accident and several other friends in accidents, this was like the first one in a training environment that I was in charge of. And we were about to go eat dinner and have drinks. And, I knew that what was about to come, the notification process.
Right.
His family, his wife was pregnant at the time. They had a young child, 1 or 2 years old at the time. And just thinking about the rest of the team, because he wasn't on my team, he was on somebody else's team. And it was almost like I looked at my guys on my team as my children. And I knew everybody did that as well as team leaders. And so they had given me him, and it'd be like, your child going to somebody else's house, or somebody else's child coming to your house, and you are responsible for their protection and their health. And so when we lost that, I was like, I failed. I failed at protecting him, at protecting their boy, their teammate. And now all the notifications are going to go out, and everyone's going to look to blame me, and I deserve it. And so that really spiraled me into a place of depression and questioning myself as a leader, questioning myself as a PJ, questioning everything, and went back into using those resources that I described earlier to try to get myself back on track, to keep myself from becoming a statistic. You're good.
Okay. Sorry.
You're good.
Yeah. So, man, thanks for sharing. Thanks for sharing that. And I was close to that event as well. Obviously with you and also with the teammate that we're talking about, man. And that's an unbelievable thing. We've already talked about all these other symptoms and all these other things that are, no kidding, weighing on you from a whole career. And now you're forced with arguably, the worst possible thing. So, how did you get through it, man? Like, what did you do to start that process, even to approach it?
So really, I leaned on those resources, and I pulled myself off a team. Talked to the therapist quite often, and as much as the therapy helps, nothing on this planet, nothing will ever change the feeling of guilt that I have. Nothing will ever allow me to think that just a piece of that I could have changed. There's something I could have changed. I could have changed something in some way to prevent that from happening. And so that was always sitting with me. The only thing that really, really kept me and gave forgiveness for myself for the most part was being as close to his family as I've become. And they have been so gracious and open arms as far as always, anytime I'm back in town, they want to link up. That I've made every effort to stay in their life, and they do the same. And they're also very devout in their faith. And that was something I've lost over the years of deploying and seeing some very terrible things. And most of that over religious purposes, people killing each other over religious purposes. And
right.
So I thought, man, there's no way that this could be a thing. And there was a few incidents that took place, specifically, one at his funeral that he was. There was a video played that was a message about moving forward and guilt, and he was involved in an incident, or he was at a school where there was a school shooting, and he wasn't there, but his friend was there, and his friend got killed. And he went down the same pathway of guilt and blame and shame, and told a story of him overcoming that. And that was precisely where I was in that darkness that he described. And it was almost like he had been talking straight to me from the other side. And it was a message that was just like, I can't ignore that. And so I reached out to a really close friend of mine that became a pastor, and just asked, can you tell me about what he believed in? And so that has helped shape my forgiveness for myself, was rediscovering that pathway, and still am rediscovering that and working at that every day. But there's things I just can't control. But again, moving forward, I was able to at least accept everything that took place. And I pulled myself off a team, and then I came back on that team because the team wanted me to come back. Most of the guys were still there and still working, and we were about to enter into a cycle to be on an alert. And as soon as I came back, within about 36 hours of coming back, we ended up launching on something. And it was back to business, really, switching the brain on of team leadership, being a PJ, and making sure the guys were taken care of. And so went out on that, and it was supposed to be short, and it ended up being a couple months long, and nobody had gotten hurt. It was actually successful, pretty kind of uneventful for the most part. And I started to get my confidence back. I was like, man, I feel good. Like I can move on with my career. And that's why I came back from that deployment and was about to deploy again. So within like 2 or 3 months, I was going to deploy again, picking out where we were going to go. And then, literally like a couple of weeks before deploying, I get a call that the investigation closed out. And the investigation closed out, and they kind of describe what had happened, or in their words, after doing all their investigation. Even though I know everything about what happened,
right.
I would venture to say a majority of what I would say at least half of what was put out in that investigation was incorrect. Like, it wasn't even, like, people weren't even in the positions that they said they were. And so I was like, it was frustrating to read that. But ultimately they said, there's nothing we could have done to change the outcome of what happened. There's nothing we could have done to change, any bit of that. But they needed to hold somebody accountable. They, being the leadership, needed to hold somebody accountable because there was a loss of life, and they held me accountable as the team leader and removed me from my position there at the 24th and removed me from the 24th itself. And that was a kick in the gut. And it wasn't just me that was removed. A couple others were removed, specifically my leadership. And the reason that they were removed was because they were protecting me, that they were doing the right thing as a leader because they don't believe that I did anything wrong that was worth me losing my career. And so I have a tremendous amount of respect for those two individuals that fell on their sword and sacrificed their own career to protect what they believed was right. And that was trying to protect me. And I didn't go down alone. I went down with those two individuals who, will forever and always be, I guess, somebody I looked up to as a leader. But yeah, so got removed, and I was given 30 days pretty much to PCS and to leave. And once that happened, I then was spiraled back down into a place of depression and guilt and shame. And now I had a piece of paper that actually, in like very clever wording, said it was my fault. And I could hold that to my psychologist and say, hey, here's the paper that says it's my fault. As much as you want to tell me it's not, this is what everybody believes. And that was frustrating for her. And even more so, like, the way that it was done, the way that my removal was done, and the other two, they didn't notify the psych staff. They didn't notify, make sure that I wasn't going to fly off the handle or go down like whatever depression route I was going to go down. They didn't have somebody like waiting there for me. It was just like, all right, well, this is what happened. And then I'm now like, go on and you need to clean out your cage. You can only do that on the weekend, and you're no longer allowed to go back to the building. And it was like, I just deployed like several times and risked my life for you. And this is it. This is what I'm getting, is like, go clean out your cage on a weekend by yourself so nobody sees you. And you get a few days to pack up, or a few weeks to pack up your family and move out of here. And you're not allowed to be in the building that you have given so much for. I was like, what a stab in the back it felt like. It was, I don't know, it was awful. And to think that there was no like, hey, maybe we should have this person's psychologist that he was speaking to, like, maybe nearby, because he's already gone through such a really hard time. It was actually me having to call her and tell her I had just gotten fired. And even then she was like, no, you didn't. She thought I was joking. And I was like, I'm dead serious. I just got kicked out of the unit. So it was that right there to me, like, even though as much as they say I was a failure in leadership, that to me was a failure in leadership on their end, because who knows what my mental state was at that time. Right. And I was just supposed to accept that my entire career and everything I'd worked so hard for is now just gone like that. So that was hard to process. Yeah. But on the flip side, it gave me clarity. Like, okay, now I know what I'm going to do. I know, like, I was given an option. Here's the places. Where do you want to go? And I was like, well, I'll tell you I'm not going to choose right now. I'll tell you on Monday or something. Like, this is a Friday. Like, cool. Thanks for the Friday news. I'll tell you on Monday when I come back from the weekend. And I came back, and I ultimately chose and said, like, look, I'm going to after talking to the psychologist and like where my headspace is, like, we're going to pursue a medical retirement because like I'm not in a good space, and the PTSD is like really kicking up, and I've got other memory loss issues and things going on. Like I'm going to pursue a medical retirement. I ask that you just leave me alone and let me go through this process, and don't try to keep me in. Don't try to persuade me in any direction. Just let me get out. And the counter to that, they gave me orders to go to Vegas, back to Vegas. The same place where I'd actually almost lost my marriage because of poor decisions I had made in the past. And I was like, what? Like, where in the world can I, why in the world would I go there? Like, this is like, if I go there, I know what's going to happen. I'm going to go find as much booze as I can find, and I'm going to have access to the strip, and I'm going to be on this destruction. So that wasn't an option to me. The only option was really just to get out. So that's why I went to the psychologist, and we pursued that medical retirement.
So on the back end of all that, like on the back end of that terrible story, and you're here at your lowest, man. Like, and I can hear it in your voice, and I was on the outside looking in, from this thing for this period of time with you. Up comes Shield and Stripes. And you decide that that's what you're going to move on, and then that's what you're going to do because you want to serve, you want to continue to serve, you want to find a way through it, you want to find a way to help everybody else.
Yeah, so I was fortunate to have the tools that I had at the unit, all the human performance staff. I was fortunate to have them, and I was at some point I knew that those things were going to go away. Like, that's a given. Inevitably, I'm going to be stuck to the VA system. And I knew a couple of my pals that had gotten out and retired recently, and I called them up and said, "Hey, what do you do? You're used to how we were treated when you're in. What do you do now? How do you keep them how do you keep yourself together?" And he listed out like all of these resources that he goes and sees, and I was like, "Bro, that is
right.
How do you do all that stuff?" And he's
right.
like, "Yeah, it's a lot. Like, you just really gotta look to seek these opportunities out and hit this nonprofit, that nonprofit." Like, man, I think we need to solve this, and we can do something better. And he was going through an executive MBA course and getting his business degree, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna go. I would love to open up a gym and have a performance center that replicated what we have in the unit. That's what I want to do. I want to open that up, and I don't know what that's going to look like, but here's my plan. I'm going to do the same thing he is, get a business degree. I'm going to use this care coalition to get an internship with a company called Exos, and one of our buddies is really good friends with one of the vice presidents at Exos, so I'm going to get an internship and see how that goes, and that was the plan. I'm going to start my business in 2024, 2025. And started that internship, and it was good information, and it was really motivating. The most motivating factor was really listening to this senior vice president and him believing in me, and hearing what I wanted to start up, because he started up what's called the Eagle Fund, which our SOCOM athletes or SOCOM members go to Exos to do an accelerated return to duty program. He started that up, and that was because he believes that he was a football player, a pro football player, and he's getting treated like this hero, and he believed that he was no hero, that these other individuals who are missing their legs are. So that's what he headed that up, and he heard what I wanted to do for folks like me and you and others that have symptoms of PTSD, and he's like, "I want to help you." And so as we started discussing this, he eventually I was like, "Hey, I'm gonna need a job at the end of this." He's like, "You don't want to work here, man. You don't need a job. You don't need this job. What you need to do is start doing what you said you're going to do." And man, that was like sink or swim. And I was like, "Well, hey, bud, tell me what I need to do." And he grabbed a whiteboard and he just started just drawing out this map. And I was like, wow, that's a lot of information. And I still don't know what to do. Like, how do I, like, is there a phone number you can give me to like start? And he's like, oh,
yeah, you're like, explain it to me like I'm 5. He draws it out. And you're like, all right, explain it to me like I'm 3.
And so he's like, oh no, I just went onto this company's website, and then I started my entity there. And so I was like, okay, cool. There's a start. Like, that's step one. I'm going to go start the entity. What do I call it? And so I went through a long period of process of figuring it out. And before I did any of that, I started making phone calls and doing research to see if maybe I was wrong. Maybe there is somebody that's doing this out there. But after a lot of research, I was discovering, for the most part, it was like 2-day or 1-day workshops, 3-day workshops about education on PTSD and operator syndrome and managing your health. And then I came across one company, and I was like, that's it. Like, everything that they're saying on their website is it. And so I contacted this person. Actually, I didn't contact them. I found them on LinkedIn. And I actually, she was at like her 499th friend or like connection. And she's
sure.
Like, I just need what, like, who wants to be my 500th? And then, or something like that. And so I connected, and I was like, eventually I'm going to talk to you. Well, because I was her 500, she said, even though she said she doesn't say this, she's like, oh, congratulations, like you're my 500th. And I was like, oh, okay, cool. Well, the reason I messaged you is because you run a business that does exactly what I want to do. And here's my story, and here's why I do this. How do you do it? And she essentially said, well, right now it's like very small. It's, not exactly what I want it to be. But it's helping these folks out with operator syndrome and these different things. So she's an occupational therapist, a doctor. And I was like, okay, well, I'm trying to start this thing up. And she's like, okay, I'll help you out. And so she starts giving me tips. And ultimately I was like, hey, I need you to just join me. Like, can you be my co-founder? Can you just help me out in this endeavor? Yeah. Are you down with that?
Yeah, it would be way more efficient if I just brought you under this as opposed to you trying to teach me through it. So let's just get to the end where we're making the product.
Yeah. And so she was all in. She was like, yeah, let's do it. That's for sure. And pulled in the other buddy I was talking about. And then we started looking at how do we start this entity up? What are we going to call it? And so Shields and Stripes made sense to me because we want to treat, first responders and veterans. And the shields typically are firefighters and police officers wear some sort of badge or shield on their chest, and stripes would typically your enlisted members of the military are the ones experiencing the PTS. So the stripes were for them as far as the structure goes. And so that was the inception of the name. And then there's some other meanings, some hidden meanings behind that that are faith-based, but nonetheless, that was the start of that. And then it was just, okay, well, how do we build this up? And I'd spent my entire adult life as a PJ. And I was like, I don't know anything about business and how to start this up. And so I'm making all the mistakes I can make of starting it up and trying to figure out what a board of directors is and what bylaws are and what governance is. And meanwhile, as a PJ, and a lot of guys don't know this as PJs, and as you are a businessman, especially in the ST community, when you're attaching to whatever special operations unit you attach to, sometimes they don't want you there. And a lot of times you have to sell yourself of why you should be there. And not only why you should be there, but why you need to be closer to the fight. I'll give you an example of one of the guys, that I've used in the past and had told me in the past is, a recce team is going to be a little bit further forward than the assault force. And usually they're the first ones in an engagement in some of those walk-ins. And so I and some others would like to go roll with the recce team, and I had experience in long-range shooting. So, hey, can I roll with you guys? And they're like, we just want to be in a firefight. We just want to be closer to the fight. I was like, well, of course, number one. But number two, if you're going to be about 300 meters, 400 meters in front of me, I run at 400, between a minute 45, 2 minutes. And that's like warming up without kit on. Now I've got kit on, so expect me to be there at 2 minutes and 30 seconds after you've been shot. And I'm going to be out of breath. So do you want me to treat you while I'm tired and out of breath? Or do you want me to be there in like 15 or 30 seconds in saving your life, or I have a chance to save you. And they go, well, that's a good point.
Yeah, it's a good value proposition you put up there, Steve. That's what they call it in the business world.
Exactly. Yeah. So, and I was doing that for my team, and I, like, hey, here's why you need to bring us. Here's what we give you, and so essentially we're salesmen, and so that kind of translated into the business I'm in now, which trying to convince people to give us money with nothing in return. And so ultimately, Shields and Stripes was started to address physical and mental symptoms of PTSD as a result from service-related trauma. My dad spent 30 years in law enforcement, and he started experiencing some PTSD at the same time as I was, and we started bonding over some of the symptoms that we were sharing. And because he had spent so long in that career field, I was like, man, dude, like, they don't get anything. Like, at least some of our military members get like something through the VA ever, even though it may not be great, it's something. These guys and gals don't get anything. And there's so many of them.
They get the phone number to like the National Crisis Line and a gold watch, and that's it. They're like, hey, thanks. Sorry about all the terrible things you saw working in your career, but yeah, if you need something, I guess call this help line.
Yeah, and they're the same as us. They like, as soon as they raise their hand and say, "Hey, I've got a problem," it's okay. You're off the line. Go sit at the desk, and they don't want to do that. So we needed to have a solution, a third-party solution for some of these folks that are seeing some things. And what I get from a lot of police officers and firefighters is, well, I haven't seen what you've seen. And I go, well, I haven't seen what you've seen. Like, I don't go and respond to car accidents where an entire family was killed or burned alive inside of a car accident. Like, I don't pick up, domestic violence cases or see children that have been beaten to death or, tortured, like these terrible, terrible instances and it's in your backyard. Like, you don't escape it. Like, we go overseas, we do, whatever we do overseas, and then we come back, and we can at least mentally separate ourselves from there and here for the most part. But my dad come back, and he has to park his car further down the road or somewhere else where, in case somebody comes in to break his house. People, I know police officers that had to move because they're getting death threats. It's in your own backyard.
Well, and imagine being, a police officer or a fireman in your local hometown. And, for us, those times that I've had, those crystallized moments of like, hey, this was a severely traumatic experience for me, for my own personal experience. Like, it's like a snapshot, but it's always some far flung place that is not here. Imagine having that place, that snapshot of the worst day of your life, and you have to drive by that on the way to dinner with your family. You have to consistently relive in that area. We do have the benefit of time and space away from those things and those places, and first responders quite simply don't. My dad was a fireman for 30 years in a small town in Ohio, right? And he wasn't a volunteer; he was a full-time dude. He was a fireman and a paramedic. And, there's not a place that we could go in that small town where he's not like, unfortunately that was I had to work a kid code right over there in that building. And it was the worst experience of my life as a dad. And like, we're just going to baseball. You know what I mean? Like, trying to put yourself in that space and having to consistently relive the worst day of your life just by means of proximity. That's a whole other issue that you have to tackle. And I can't imagine how hard it is.
Yeah, exactly. So I wanted to, the goal was to hopefully touch some of these individuals that have these experiences that none of us could ever fathom and provide that resource to them. And it couldn't be a for-profit. It had to be a nonprofit that would, on the good graces of others and the good deeds of others, to be able to say, I'm going to pitch in some money to make sure that these folks get the help that they need. And right now, we started it in 2021 in April, and we wanted to start off small and start scaling it up. And so we ran our first course, and it was a week in person at Exos, and they would get a strength conditioning program. They would get a nutrition, they would get physical therapy, and then we'd have a psychologist on our staff that would do individual and group therapy in the afternoon, and an occupational therapist to work through education of stress and operator syndrome. The next one we did was a 2-week in person and a 6-week of virtual therapy. So the virtual therapy portion, when they leave the in-person portion and they go back home, it goes what did these individuals who left their homes and their families, why did they have to leave? And we can explain that and incorporate to the family on what the significance of them leaving and resetting and then going back. And then discovering what's inside or exploring what's inside their pantries so we can create, good food plans for them. Look inside of whatever fitness, facilities that they might have to have some sort of strength conditioning program for them. And then physical therapy. We have our own physical therapists on our staff that works through them still through a virtual telehealth means, and they still get to keep their therapist through that 6 weeks. And then expanded yet again to our third program, which is our full program, which is 3 weeks in person at an Exos site in our performance gym, and then 9 weeks of that telehealth. So 3 months total of them getting this long-term care, and it's continued to grow. So, we've got dietitians on staff, our physical therapists, our strength conditioning coaches, and our psychologists that receive a transfer from when they leave Exos, that performance gym, and use a lot of their in-house services. And they go into the virtual setting to now we use our in-house services and get a really good handover from them. The only thing that stays the same and consistent throughout is that psychologist and the mental health stuff they get from the very beginning to the end. There's no turnover. That's what they get from beginning to end. And it costs about between $15,000 and $20,000 per person, depending on the season and where we're at with travel and rates going up. But that's essentially what we do, why we do it. We do 8 people at a time, 8 veterans, active duty members, first responders at a time, and it's made that way specifically so we can have very individualized care, a very focused individual care. And we run currently 2 a year. We have the capability and the means to do more, but the costs and the funding is our limitation. If we had more funding, we'd be able to do 3, we could do 4 with the different facilities that are available to us. It's very costly, but it's worth it. And we've got a lot of very big patriots out there, patriotic companies that are corporate sponsors and sponsors of other foundations like Special Forces Charitable Trust, Green Beret Foundation, the Tommel Foundation, Big Fish Foundation. All these are great foundations that are helping put these heroes through this program to ultimately get them to not be a statistic, number one, to get them functioning better as a family and manage these traumatic experiences with better tools, and then hopefully getting them to be performing in their job longer if they are still an active duty or active firefighter or police officer.
Man, so you guys can check it out. It's over at shieldsandstripes.org. You can see right on the homepage about how you can donate if you would so choose, and you can see testimonials and how many folks they've actually helped. So right now we've got 18 lives changed and donations of over $300,000. So you guys are at like $330,000. Man, I just can't say how grateful and how proud of you I am, man. Grateful for the project and proud to see that. With the amount of trauma that we just talked about, the short sit down, man, like you shouldn't be alive. You shouldn't be even sitting here talking with the hopeful voice and tone that you have right now. And I say that as a guy that's known you, more than a decade, 15 years at this point or however long it's been, man. I think the impact that you guys are having, if it was on just a single person, right? If you never helped any more than a single person, you would have done more than the rest of humanity for this cause and for the things that you're getting after. And the fact that you should be doing 3 or 4 a year. And, hopefully we can get the word out there and get you guys funded in order to do that, because it's important. It's not only, from the outside looking in, but from the inside looking out, like this is a righteous mission. And I'm glad that you found it. And I'm glad that you're here. And overall, thank you for sharing your story, man. It can't possibly be easy to be that vulnerable and to speak as clearly and just matter of factly as you have about the entire thing, because all of these things that we talked about here, those are moments that are the worst day of your life. And when you start lining up, how long we talked for 2 hours, you talked about the worst day of your life, except there's 20 of the worst days of your life. And sometimes it's not even with an event. Sometimes it's just a Tuesday turns out to be the worst day of your life. So from me to you, just as a friend and a man, you know, I'm proud of you. Thank you for coming on. Thank you for being vulnerable. And we will get the word out about Shields and Stripes, but you keep your head down and you keep making that thing as big as possible.
Thanks, man. I appreciate all those humbling words, man. It means a lot to me, and it's really good to see you again, and proud of you for what you're doing here as well. So, and I appreciate it very much that you allow me the platform to be able to share a little bit about what we're doing and how we're doing it. So, you know, I run that nonprofit, and along with my co-founder and several other individuals that you know, and then I stay at home and try to be the best dad I can be. That's what I spend most of my time, and try to make up for a lot of the mistakes I made in the past. You know, I fought really hard I missed just about every single birthday of my oldest son, and now he's 13 and in travel ball, and I do everything I can to right some of those wrongs, and, you know, spend a lot of time doing that. I think that's my biggest focus and biggest priority.
Never quit, right?
That's right.
It's not just a couple words, man. Sometimes you got to put your head down and go do it. Steve, once again, man, thanks so much for coming on. We'll talk soon.